You were never supposed to become someone else. But somewhere along the way, healing got sold as a transformation. Like you had to upgrade yourself into a better version, a calmer version, a more together version. You thought healing meant becoming someone who no longer feels too much, someone who no longer overthinks, overgives, or overreacts, someone stronger, tougher, colder. But here's the truth. Healing is not about becoming a brand new person. It's about remembering the parts of you that had to hide, the parts that were too soft for a world that praised hardness, the parts that were silenced because someone made you believe your sensitivity was a weakness. Healing is about coming home, not to a place, but to yourself. It's peeling off the layers of performance, protection, and perfectionism until you reconnect with the child you once were before the world taught you to be ashamed of them. Because you weren't born ashamed. You weren't born insecure. You weren't born afraid to speak, to take space, or to rest. You learned those things, and now you can unlearn them. So before you chase becoming someone new, ask yourself, who was I before I was told I had to change? When you were little, you weren't performing. You cried when you were sad. You laughed when something was funny. You asked for what you needed, loudly, unapologetically. That was your truth, raw, honest, alive. But slowly, you began to notice. Some emotions made people uncomfortable. Some truths made them angry. Some needs made you feel like a burden. And so you adjusted. You lowered your voice. You held back your tears. You stopped asking for too much. You learned that being easy to love meant being easy to handle. That's when the mask began to form. Not because you were fake, but because you were surviving. The truth is, the original you was never the problem. What hurt you was being in spaces that couldn't hold your truth, with people who were too disconnected from themselves to accept your aliveness. And so, you made yourself smaller, quieter, simpler, less you. Not because you wanted to, but because it felt safer. But here's what healing dares you to do. To remember who you were before the performance. To reconnect with the version of you that didn't question their worth because they had never been taught to. The journey isn't about becoming flawless. It's about unlearning the shame that told you you had to be. And that's the most radical healing of all. To stop apologizing for the real you. Let's be honest. Most of the ways you behave today, the overthinking, the people-pleasing, the perfectionism, weren't born from joy. They were born from fear. You didn't start life needing to control everything. You learned to be in control because chaos taught you it wasn't safe to let go. You didn't start life afraid to disappoint people. You learned to shape yourself into what others needed because love always felt conditional. You didn't start life ignoring your emotions. You learned to suppress them because expressing them made you too much, too needy, or too dramatic. You adapted. You became what your environment required of you to stay connected, to stay protected. But survival is not the same as living. And all these masks you wear, they helped you back then. But now, they're suffocating you. Healing means recognizing that your coping mechanisms were intelligent. They were necessary. But they were never you.
So no, you're not broken. You're patterned. And patterns can be rewired. But that starts by honoring this truth. You didn't become this version of yourself by accident. You shaped yourself to survive a reality that made it unsafe to be authentic. Now it's time to ask, is this version of me still keeping me safe or just keeping me small?
Somewhere along the way, you started believing you were the problem. You looked at your anxiety and called it weakness. You looked at your sadness and called it failure. You looked at your sensitivity and called it shame. But here's what nobody told you. You were reacting to a world that never made space for your depth. Your pain wasn't a flaw, it was feedback. Your emotions weren't failures, they were signals. You thought you had to fix yourself, that healing meant removing the parts of you that felt too heavy, too messy, too emotional. But the truth is, you were never broken. You were simply layered. Layered with fear, layered with guilt, layered with behaviors that were never yours to begin with. You don't need fixing. You need remembering. Remembering the version of you that danced without shame, that spoke without second-guessing, that felt without filtering. That version still exists. It's just been buried under years of pretending to be okay, performing for approval, and protecting yourself from disappointment. Healing is not about cutting pieces of yourself off. It's about returning to what's real beneath the noise. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that person is still waiting for you.
Trauma doesn't just hurt you, it shapes you. Not because the pain is who you are, but because you had to adapt around it. You stopped trusting people and called it independence. You stopped needing anyone and called it strength. You shut down your emotions and called it maturity. But those weren't choices. They were protections. And over time, those protections started to feel like personality traits, like permanent parts of who you are, like this is just the way I am. But they're not. They're who you became to survive what you went through. When your nervous system was flooded with fear, when your boundaries were ignored, when your voice was silenced, you didn't get the chance to grow. You had to guard. And now you carry the armor like it's skin. But what if your numbness isn't your nature? What if your detachment isn't your truth? What if your constant self-control isn't strength, but fear in disguise? Healing is when you stop confusing the wound with your identity. You are not your shutdown. You are not your silence. You are not your fear of being seen. You're the person underneath it all. Still alive, still waiting, still whole. You don't need to become more. You just need to reclaim what trauma tried to erase.
Most people imagine healing as this huge, visible breakthrough. Like one day you'll wake up glowing with clarity, unshakable, unbothered, healed. But real healing isn't loud. It's not glamorous. It's not something the world applauds. It's quiet, subtle, sometimes invisible. It's choosing not to chase someone who keeps hurting you, even if it aches. It's saying no for the first time and sitting with the guilt instead of erasing yourself again. It's crying in your car and realizing you're actually feeling something instead of numbing it. That's what healing looks like. It's not about being constantly happy. It's about being real. You stop faking smiles. You stop explaining your silence. You stop shrinking your truth to fit other people's comfort. You no longer seek to impress, you seek to align. You're not trying to be enough anymore. You're remembering that you always were. Healing is when you stop running from yourself. When you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin to ask, "What happened to me? And how did I survive it?" That's where the power is. Not in pretending to be healed, but in having the courage to feel what was never allowed. And in those raw, quiet moments, you begin to recognize you're not becoming someone new. You're returning. Healing isn't just light and peace. It's not a spa day for your soul. It's a confrontation with the anger you swallowed to keep the peace, with the tears you held back to look strong, with the parts of you that were told they were too much or not enough. True healing asks you to stop running, to stop distracting yourself with productivity, perfection, or people-pleasing, to stop numbing your pain with noise, with screens, with constant motion. Because the truth is, you can't heal what you refuse to feel. And most of us were taught that feeling is dangerous. You were taught that crying makes you weak, that needing someone makes you needy, that setting boundaries makes you selfish. So you adapted. You buried your needs to be accepted. But now, those buried parts are asking to be seen. Healing means opening that door, not to punish the past, but to release its grip on your present. It means finally letting yourself grieve the things you never called losses, the love you never received, the childhood you had to survive, the version of you that no one ever protected. It's not easy. It's not linear. And sometimes it hurts more before it heals. But it's also liberating. Because what's more exhausting than pretending you're okay is never being allowed to not be. Healing is giving yourself that permission to be real, to be raw, to be whole, even while you're still in pieces. One of the most surprising things about healing is how silently it starts to reshape your life. You begin to lose tolerance for things that drain you. Conversations that once felt normal suddenly feel empty. People you used to chase now feel misaligned. You stop forcing connections. You stop begging to be understood. You stop over-explaining your existence. It's not that you become cold. You become clear. You begin to choose peace over performance, presence over perfection, depth over drama. And here's something no one tells you. As you return to your true self, some people won't recognize you because they only knew the version of you that was edited for their comfort. They knew the agreeable you, the self-sacrificing you, the apologetic, always smiling, always managing version of you. But you're not here to maintain a version of yourself that made others comfortable. You're here to become whole. And wholeness doesn't always look polite. Sometimes it looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like disappointing others to finally stop disappointing yourself. You don't owe anyone the survival version of you. The more you heal, the less you tolerate pretending, the less you tolerate noise, the more you crave what feels real. That's not selfish. That's sacred. There's something deeply sacred about realizing you were never lost. You were just buried. Buried under expectations, under shame, under years of being told who you should be. And now, little by little, you're uncovering the truth. You were never too sensitive. You were never too emotional. You were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't hold that kind of depth. So you assumed it was your fault for being deep. But the parts of you that you silenced, they didn't disappear. They waited. They waited for a safe moment, a quiet pause, a soft invitation to come back. Healing isn't discovering a new self. It's remembering the self you had to forget to survive. It's when your laughter returns, not the polite, controlled laugh, but the one that spills out without fear. It's when your voice softens because it no longer has to defend or perform. It's when your body relaxes, not because life is perfect, but because you've stopped bracing for impact every second. The truth is, healing feels a lot like returning home to someone you didn't realize you missed. And that someone is you. Not the curated, socially acceptable version, but the original, the unfiltered, the unafraid. The one who remembers what it feels like to just be.
Healing isn't a finish line. It's not a trophy to earn. It's not about changing who you are to fit a mold. Healing is your return. It's the slow, sometimes messy process of remembering who you were before the pain, before the fear, before the world told you to shrink. And here's the most beautiful truth. You're already on this journey. Every time you pause instead of pushing, every time you say no instead of yes to protect your peace, every time you feel your feelings instead of hiding them, you're coming home. So be patient with yourself. There is no timeline. There is no perfect way. There is only you in all your beautiful, complicated, messy glory. And the more you remember who you truly are, the more you'll realize healing isn't becoming someone new, it's remembering who you were all along. Thank you for being brave enough to listen today. If this spoke to you, remember your story matters, and your true self is worth coming home to.